Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to react to the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction 2025. I have my laptop up right here. You might hear a little bit of noise in the background. That's because as I am recording this intro, they are running through hopefully the last of the journalism prizes for this year, and they will be pivoting to move into arts in a moment. And fiction is last. If anything interesting comes up on the way to the fiction prize, I will mention it here, but odds are the next thing you're going to see is me reacting to the fiction prize. I have pulled some books from that I have in my library that could be winners. If I don't own the winner, you'll see an image up here, but I pulled James by Percival Everett, which was my prediction for the winner for this year, but the complicating factor is that this feels like the overwhelming favorite, and the overwhelming favorite sometimes doesn't win because it seems too obvious. I've also pulled Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, Fire Exit by Morgan Talty, and The Mighty Red by Louise Erdrich. I do think there's a big chance we could end up seeing All Fours by Miranda July or like last year, we might get a complete surprise. So they are currently announcing the finalists for the Criticism Prize, and we'll see what happens soon. I am nervous, as always. I get such anxiety leading up to the announcement, like my hands are kind of shaking. It's always stresses me out, but I'm so excited, and I really feel anxious to find out what wins. I'm at the point where I just want to know, and the speculation is going to be over, and I'm going to be happy with that. So let's see. They have just done what I believe is the final award before we move into Arts and Letters, and Arts and Letters is where the books are, but I feel like I should just remind you where I stand on All Fours by Miranda July, because if that comes into play, it will be relevant. I had previously read a book of Miranda July's and really did not get along with it, so I DNF'd it. And for that reason, I have held off on reading All Fours. I'm not convinced it would be something that I would like. And a lot of the feedback, even the praise, has reminded me of things that I didn't like about that previous book. So I have basically decided I will only read All Fours if it ends up winning the Pulitzer Prize. So we'll see if I end up needing to read All Fours by Miranda July very soon. Interestingly, there was just a tie in the history section, so that's fascinating. I don't think we're going to be getting a tie in fiction, but just interesting to note. So in the memoir or autobiography category, we have Alexandra Fuller, an author I want to catch up to, a graphic memoir, which is really interesting. I believe the only graphic novel or memoir to have a Pulitzer so far is Mouse. And that got a special citation. And then I Heard Her Call My Name, a memoir of transition, which sounds like a very interesting book. It's something that I have wanted. Wow, Feeding Ghosts, a graphic memoir, won. I think that's the first competitive Pulitzer that a graphic memoir has written, but I will need to fact check that. Okay, here we go. The finalists in fiction. Headshot, a novel by Rita Bullwinkle. That is really interesting. And James by Percival Everett. And next is Mice, 1961 by Stacey Levine. I don't even know what that is. Oh, wow. There's a fourth, The Unicorn Woman by Gail Jones. Usually there are three. In cases where there's a fourth, it makes me feel like the board requested an additional option. I feel like we're coming down to either Percival Everett or Gail Jones. It's going to be very interesting to see what is about to happen. I'm thinking James still. The winner is James by Percival Everett. This had to happen. Here, let me see if they say. Nope, that's it. We're signing off. It's James by Percival Everett. I think this is interesting because this is sort of inevitable, because this is such a favorite. It's a great Pulitzer Prize winner. And I know there are people out there who are sort of indifferent to James or mixed on it or didn't like it as much as the hype. But the hype has been huge for this book. And in that way, it kind of feels inevitable. But I think a lot of us, myself included, have been scared that the inevitable was going to create a backlash and that this would not end up happening, but it did. And I think that just goes to show that this is an undeniable winner for the prize. And since I have already read it, I can do a deep dive on the Pulitzer winner for this year very soon, because I love to be able to talk about these in real time. When I do my Pulitzer deep dives on books from the past, we're sort of trying to piece together what made one book stand out from the others, and I can talk about this one in real time. And Percival Everett was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for a book called Telephone a couple of years ago. And after that, his profile just exploded into the stratosphere. A lot of that has to do with the fact that his next book was The Trees, which is a book that was a finalist for the Booker Prize, and a lot of people thought would be a contender for the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, and then it ended up not happening. Percival Everett is someone who has been out making fiction for a long time, but only recently has he become so renowned for his work. And now people are even going back and discovering older works of his and bringing them back into the focus. It happened with American Fiction, which was adapted into a film. And he is an author who it quickly started to feel like it was only a matter of time before he won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And I'm doubly glad that James ended up winning, because it would start to feel like if he didn't win for this book, that it would be kind of like Martin Scorsese at the Oscars, where he didn't win for Raging Bull, and then by the 2000s, people were starting to get like really upset that he didn't have an Oscar and would just constantly talk about it no matter what he did. And finally, there was such a push that he ended up winning for The Departed. And I guess the Pulitzer corollary would be Louise Erdrich, who had so many classic books that could have been winners. Like her first book, Love Medicine. She was a finalist for the book A Plague of Doves, and she won a National Book Award for The Roundhouse. And then finally she won for The Night Watchman, which has sort of mixed reactions. I had mixed feelings about that book. So it just feels like if Percival Everett had not won now, that's the type of thing that would have happened. There would have been this push to get him a Pulitzer Prize, and then maybe somewhere along the way, he would have won for something a little lesser that people aren't so excited about. I think, or I hope, we can all get behind this win. So if you're unfamiliar, James is a retelling of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but it's also a reconsideration. It recontextualizes the book because it is told from the perspective of Jim, the enslaved man who travels with Huckleberry Finn and has adventures with him. And by getting into the voice of Jim, who comes to be known as James, as he develops authority and agency on this expedition and learns about the power of telling your own story, you see that James is a very intelligent man, despite his depiction in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And you can see that he code switches and will play up ignorance and the way sort of vernacular and slang when he is speaking to white people. But in the privacy of his own home and in his own mind, he is this very intelligent, well-spoken man. And it's a very powerful book. I firmly believe this sits very well in the Pulitzer canon, and I think not awarding this book would have been a huge oversight. Not just that it would have led to that situation where Percival Everett people would have just wanted him to win, and it would have started to get aggressive. And, I think this is the right book for the right author in the right year. And I'm glad that we got here. I do have a bit of a conspiracy theory about the 4 finalists. I wonder if the jury attempted to leave James off of their list and selected those other 3 books because the board can ask them to send a 4th option. You know, the rules of the Pulitzer Prize are pretty murky. And again, I will get into this a lot more when I do my deep dive on James. The rules are pretty murky. The Pulitzer itself is a pretty opaque institution. They don't really welcome you in. But I believe the board, which ultimately decides the winner, can ask the jury for another option to consider, or they can ask why a particular book was not included. Spoiler for a later Pulitzer Prize deep dive, I believe the same thing happened with All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. That was one of the most popular books of the year, like James. It was the book that a lot of people predicted would win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, like James. And ultimately, there were 4 finalists that year. And as I said, usually it's 3. And that makes me think the jury for that year left off All the Light We Cannot See. And the board may have reached out and said, can we ask why you didn't include this? Maybe allow us to suggest that or to consider it. So the fact that there are 4 nominees makes me think that the jury may have attempted to leave James off of the list. Because I can't imagine that if James was in the list of finalists, that they would have asked for another one. I think it's much more likely that James was not included and the board asked about it and ended up getting offered it and then ended up awarding it the prize. Let's see if they have updated the Pulitzer Prize website yet, because we do not get to know who the jury is until the prizes are awarded. Okay, they have updated the site, so we can find out who the jury is. All right, the jury is Merv Emra, Shapiro Silverberg Professor of Creative Writing and Criticism, Wesleyan University, and a contributing writer for The New Yorker. Jonathan Lethem, the Roy Edward Disney 51 Professor of Creative Writing at Pomona College, also an author. He's written Chronic City and a bunch of other novels. Brian Washington, writer and assistant professor in creative writing at Rice University. I believe also the author, I don't have it anymore, of Family Meal and some other books. Layla Lalami, who has been a Pulitzer Prize finalist before for The Moores Account and released a novel 2 years ago, I believe. And Ayanna Mathis, this distinguished lecturer of Hunter College. Interesting group of people. Now we know who they are. And let's see what Mice 1961 is about, because that's the one I was having trouble repeating what I was hearing and paying attention as it was happening in real time. So let's see what they say about each of these books now that we can. And we're going to start with Mice 1961 by Stacy Levine, which is from Verse Chorus Press, a novel set in the Cold War era about 2 orphaned half-sisters, a boarder, and the neighbors who surround them. A stylized and startling depiction of lives lived at a high pitch of emotion in the shadow of global catastrophe. I have just not heard of that book. So let's see. Mice 1961. I want to look up reviews. This must have been a very under the radar book, because it looks like Kirkus did not review it. The Washington Post did. So it's going to be interesting to get to know that book a little more. And maybe it'll be something that I would be interested in reading. Their summary of The Unicorn Woman by Gail Jones, which is published by Beacon Press. An ambitious and topsy-turvy vision of the segregated South, narrated by an Army veteran whose obsession with a sideshow attraction is presented in a swirl of memories and dreams, rich with literary allusions and jokes. So I'm kind of feeling that if the original 3 finalists were Mice 1961, The Unicorn Woman, and Headshot, the jury may have been trying to stack the deck for Gail Jones, which I feel like is probably what they were trying to do when the Netanyahus ended up winning, because Gail Jones's book, and I am Palmares. That was the name of it. It was a finalist. And the other two books, the Netanyahus and something to do with a monkey. I know that sounds funny, but A Monkey Boy, I think, is the title. Netanyahu's and Monkey Boy were fairly similar. Palmares was the outlier, which almost makes me wonder if the jury was kind of hoping that Palmares would stand out, and the board instead fixated on the Netanyahus and allowed it to win. So I kind of wonder if the jury was trying to throw the prize to Gail Jones and do an end run around James by Percival Everett. And we ended up, I think, where we should have been in the first place. And then Headshot, I think a lot of people are familiar with this book already, myself included. I have read it. It was on the long list for the Booker Prize last year, and it was a very cilantro book. And when I say cilantro, I mean that people either love it or hate it. And the people who love it, I was one of the few people who was more kind of mixed in the middle. There are parts of it that I liked. There are aspects that I really didn't like. But it seems like people tend to much more gravitate toward loving it or hating it. There's not too much in between. Here's their description of it. About 8 young women in a boxing tournament that examines the competitors' personalities through their fighting styles, a taut narrative about the struggle to determine one's own fate. And that struggle is one of the things that I found compelling about the book. I didn't like some of the description, like a lot of food references to describe people's bodies. Like at one point, someone's calves are described as looking like uncooked spaghetti. Interesting, but and someone's neck is described as looking like raw cookie dough at one point. So let's hear their citation for James by Percival Everett. An accomplished reconsideration of Huckleberry Finn that gives agency to Jim to illustrate the absurdity of racial supremacy and provide a new take on the search for family and freedom. And they have a quick bio of Percival Everett, a distinguished professor of English at USC. His most recent books include Dr. No, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction and winner of the Penn Gene Stein Book Award. The Trees, which was a finalist for the Booker Prize and the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. Telephone, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. So Much Blue, Erasure, and I Am Not Sidney Poitier. And he, as I said, his profile just shot up into the stratosphere after he became a finalist for Telephone. You can't just credit the Pulitzer Prize with bringing him into the forward, but it definitely helped raise his profile, because I think when he became a finalist, there was a greater marketing push on his next book, The Trees. And The Trees itself is what really made his name and made him such a known author. But I do think that it got that push from his stance as a Pulitzer Prize finalist. And this just felt inevitable after that he would win. And even when James was announced, I think a lot of people started clamoring like, okay, this is where he's going to get his Pulitzer. And this is one of the rare times that the Pulitzer aligns with the National Book Award. They don't very often. The last time it did align was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. And usually in cases where they do align, it's because there was an undeniable book. Underground Railroad is a classic case for that. It was the biggest book of the year, like James. It was a critical favorite, like James. And it was the book that a lot of people expected to win the Pulitzer Prize, like James. So it's cases like that where you end up seeing the National Book Award and the Pulitzer align. And part of that is due to the fact that the National Book Award took a bit of a detour for a while, where they were awarding very quirky, out-of-the-box style books. Europe Central, I think, is like the classic example of a book that, and sometimes they've recognized books that it almost feels like they were deliberately trying to get out of recognize something that wasn't going to be recognized elsewhere. And for that reason, it wasn't really possible for them to end up lining up anyway. I have notes in my I have Pulitzer notes. So this will tell me the last time a National Book Award and a Pulitzer lined up. So yeah, the last time was the Underground Railroad. You have to go back to The Shipping News by Annie Proulx in the 90s before you see another instance where the National Book Award and the Pulitzer lined up. And then you'd have to go back to The Color Purple by Alice Walker for the next case before that. And I think that just goes to show again, when they do align, it's because there's an undeniable book, and James is definitely that. I'm so happy that I am now going to be able to put this book on my Pulitzer shelf. I might invite you along with me while I do that. Although in front of my shelf I have a fan and it's not exactly clean, but we will do it. And I think this was the right choice. I would have been happy with Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange because I read this book recently and really liked it. I would have made it a finalist if I were in charge of these things, but I'm not. And ultimately, I think this is the correct decision. And it's nice to get to that after last year, where the winner came very left field and was not something that a lot of people, myself included, predicted would win. So I think it's makes me feel good because last year to me and to many other people felt unsatisfying in the end, especially once I read The Night Watch and aggressively disliked it. I will put my reaction and my deep dive on Night Watch down below if you would like to see me be angry about a book. This is a much better case, and it feels much more like the year before that when there was actually a tie and Demon Copperhead and Trust both won, and I almost lost my mind. I was so excited about that. So I think if I had been in charge, I probably would have given the prize to James, and Wandering Stars would have been among my finalists. I'm trying to think what I would have made my third finalist. I'm going to pull up my predictions and see. So I still haven't read All Fours. Now I don't have to read All Fours, which is making me feel good. Maybe I would reconsider my opinion of Miranda July if I did, but I don't have to anymore. I still need to read Martyr by Kaveh Akbar and catch up to that. I still need to read My Friends by Hisham Matar. And I did think Long Island Compromise could be a spoiler, but I DNF'd that book. I think Danzy Senna, Percival Everett's wife, would be... I think she's building a case for herself, so it'll be interesting to see if she can explode into that as well. I'm just going to leave it alone and say that I would definitely have given the prize to James, and I would have included Wandering Stars as a finalist. I'll dive a little deeper. Oh, The History of Sound. That would have been a finalist for me, most likely. I'll dig a little more deeply when I do my deep dive on James by Percival Everett. So I'm happy. I know there are people out there who are not that much of a fan of James, but I like to think this is a Pulitzer win that we can all get behind and be happy about and celebrate. And I hope we can do that because I think history will end up looking at last year as a mistake, and history will look at this year as the correct choice. I think James is destined to be a classic of American literature alongside The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So really, you cannot argue with this. I'm happy for Percival Everett. I'm happy for James. I'm happy for the publishers of James. This is from Doubleday. And I'm happy that I have a copy of the book and that I ordered it from Parnassus, signed. Is this a first edition? I think it is. Yes, this is a first edition. So I have a signed first edition of James, and that makes me very happy. And let's do this. Let's end this video by having you help me put this on my Pulitzer shelf. I'm going to put this down for a second so I can get my phone. Hopefully this won't make anybody dizzy. All right. So we're going to whirl around and get away from the light a little bit. Here is my Pulitzer shelf. These are arranged in chronological order. So we start with the older ones and we work our way down to the bottom. Let me push this fan out of the way because it's exactly where James is going to need to go. And I have all these. Oh, wow. We're having a time. These little stands that I am holding on to. All right. So we have last year, Night Watch. I didn't want to face that book out, so I didn't. And now we have a book that I feel confident facing out on my Pulitzer shelf. There we go. James is on the Pulitzer shelf, and I feel good about it. And by the way, I still have a lot of room from this shelf to grow. I am kind of happy seeing James faced out not too far away from Beloved. I feel good about this. I hope you do as well. I would love to hear your thoughts about this Pulitzer win, if there was something that you were rooting for instead, and how you think this win will go down in history. Let me know all of that in the comment section down below, and stay tuned. Again, I have read James, so I am going to immediately start working on a Pulitzer Prize deep dive where I talk about James, and my feelings about it, because I was a little conflicted about the ending when I read it, but the more the book has sat with me, the more I have appreciated it. So let me know your thoughts, and I'll be working on that. I'll talk about the book, what it is about, and Percival Everett more in depth, and I'll think a little more about what my finalists would have been for this year. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Much more to come, so stay tuned. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.